Poppy reads aloud. Um, History of us, war, peace, and all that jazz. Be aware this does have bias toward a progressive democratic agenda, but we will forge on. On the very day Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first inauguration, the day he told America that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, something fearful was happening in Germany. It would change the fate of the world. Reichstag, Germany's Congress, was deciding to give absolute government power to the German Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Imagine a country letting its meanest, worst people take charge. Imagine giving those kinds of people the power of life and death over the whole nation. Imagine a nation where children are taught to be tattletales and tell the secret police about anyone who protests, even their parents. Imagine a nation that burns books of its greatest writers because it fears and hates ideas and truth. Imagine a nation that kills people because it doesn't like their religion or their ideas or because they're hard handicapped. That's what was happening in Germany in the 1930s. Germany no longer even attempted to be a democracy. It willingly became a dictatorship, the most evil dictatorship in recorded history, although the dictatorship in Russia was almost as bad. The Germans used their intelligence and skill to create factories of death. They allowed their government to do unspeakable deeds. Since Germans did not approve, some Germans did not approve, but few spoke out. To do so meant risking their lives. But in that March of 1933, most people in America paid no attention to what was happening in Germany. In the sidebar, it says, in the Weimar Republic in Germany, the Chancellor was chosen like the Prime Minister in Great Britain by his party's leaders, not by direct election. The head of the party with the most seats in the Reichstag became Chancellor. Hitler's party was the National Socialist Nazi Party. Notice, by the way, that it's National Socialists. Socialists are leftists. And so for anybody claiming that Hitler is on the right, he's wrong. Nationalism may be on the right. Socialism is not. The inventor of this is called Benito Mussolini, who saw that communism had no driving passion. So he combined it with nationalism, socialism with nationalism, and was able to create this hybrid that had a fervor to it that communism lacked. Next, sidebar. Oh boy. German industry and transportation collapsed after the Great War. In 1922, these women and children, desperate for fuel, were gleaning coal scraps on a mine dump heap. Picture of people scraping to get by. Another sidebar. In October 1922, 4,500 German marks, that's paper money, bought $1. In November 23rd, the exchange rate was 4.2 trillion marks to $1. One woman lit the fire with marks. Children played blocks with hundreds of bills. During the Great War, the German leaders kept telling their people that Germany was winning. So it was a real shock when those same leaders surrendered. Somehow the Germans couldn't believe they had really lost. They felt betrayed. The Versailles Treaty was harsh, but in 1918 the people had to force their own. Germans had forced their own harsh peace treaty on Russia at a place in Poland called Brest-Litovsk. Brest-Litovsk. Okay, by the way, Victor Davis Hansen, a scholar, has done a comparison between that treaty and the Versailles Treaty. It was much harsher, and actually the Germans had come up with its own peace treaty with France, and it was going to take away every single seaport that France owned, and it was going to enact much worse seizure of territory as well as fines and penalties. So to say the Versailles Treaty was harsh, um, well, you look up on the internet his lecture on the Great War. It's revolutionary to your thinking, and it contradicts these people. The Depression seemed more important. Adolf Hitler. He was a little man with a black mustache and a dark straight hair that fell into his face. He strutted about, raising his arm in a straight salute and shrieking his speeches. He didn't seem evil, he seemed silly. The German people, in fact, of course, the Marx Brothers came up with a hilarious parody of Hitler, and that should be also viewed. The German people didn't find him silly. They were still angry about the war they had lost. Their leaders and historians had misled them about the cause of the Great War. They had been told that Germany, no more to blame for the start of the First World War than any other. They had been told that Germany was no more to blame for the start of the First World War than any other nation. That wasn't true, but the Germans believed it. They thought the rest of the world had picked on them. They thought the Versailles Treaty, the treaty that ended the Great War, was unfair. They were humiliated by the terms of peace. Germany was not allowed to have a large army, navy, or air force. Germany was to make large cash payments called reparations to the winners to help pay back the cost of the war. Germany was made to say that it was totally to blame for the war. By the way, the reason that we say Germany started a war was Germany thought that if there was a war, if there was going to be a war, and in order to win the war, they had to strike first. So that's what they did, because they saw war coming. Since most Germans thought that they were no more to blame for the war than others, they were furious. By the way, no foreign troop ever occupied Germany after World War I. No foreign troop ever stepped foot in Germany in World War I. And that's why they thought they were winning, because they were 40 to 60 miles inside of France. And never did a foreign army. Pershing and other generals recommended going in occupying Germany, but it didn't happen. Germany just realized they were going to lose because of the American entrance into the war. And they blamed that entrance and that stabbing in the back on the Jewish people and elites that were Jewish, rich people that were Jewish and powerful people. As it turned out, we lent Germany much more than they ever paid. So let's try that again. So since most Germans thought they were no more to blame for the war than others, they were furious, especially about those payments. As it turned out, we lent Germany much more than they ever paid, but most Germans didn't know that. German citizens were angry and unhappy. The country was in awful shape economically. Soon after the war, Germany suffered a time of terrible inflation. The government began printing lots of money, partly to pay those reparations. They were cheating, by the way. If you print more money, your money goes down. You still pay the same amount, $100, but your $100 actually ends up being worth $1 if you increase your money supply by 100. When you print, printing presses ran all day and night. When you print a lot of currency, soon none of it is worth much. Prices in Germany rose beyond belief. In 1923, a Hershey bar cost 150,000 German marks. In the United States, the same chocolate bar cost a nickel. German money was almost worthless. Buying a loaf of bread might take a bucket full of bills. People lost all their savings. They had to use up everything they had just to pay the rent. Then, after they had finally got the inflation under control, the Great Depression set in. Unemployment became a big problem. What the German people wanted was a leader, someone who could lead them out of the economic mess, someone who would make them feel good about themselves. During this Depression era, people in other countries were looking for strong leaders. The Americans chose Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Germans chose Adolf Hitler. They made a big mistake. That mistake would cost them and the rest of the world grief beyond imagining. Their leader was an evil genius who captured his countrymen and women in a web of words and convinced them they could solve all their problems. He told them that others were to blame for Germany's troubles. He told them that Germans were greater than any other people, a nation, and meant to rule the world. He told them that other people should be their slaves. He told them they must love their fatherland, Germany, before all else. He told them that they must not worry about right or wrong, because anything Germany did would be right. He told them that might makes right, and most believed him. Hitler wasn't the only one who would preach the gospel of nationalism, that loving your nation was more important than loving truth and right actions. Militant nationalism was a 20th century disease. In Japan, a military dictatorship took control of the nation and began stomping on its neighbors. The Japanese too were suffering from economic depression. They thought they needed more room for their growing population. One last page. They began by attacking China with a ferocity that it was still hard to believe. In a massive campaign of terror, millions of civilians were tortured and killed. Just as in Germany, the Japanese rulers told the people they were a superior race, destined to rule others. In Spain, a strong man named Francisco Franco muscled his way to power, although many Spaniards and other Europeans, and some Americans too, fought against him. In Italy, a pompous dictator named Benito Mussolini took control of the government. Mussolini was a bully, and like all bullies, he picked on those who were weak. He sent Italian forces to Ethiopia. There, Italian tanks, machine guns, and airplanes attacked brave Ethiopians who fought back with spears and lances. Russian dictator Joseph Stalin killed millions of his own people. Anyone who he believed might threaten his rule. His kind of government, he said, would soon conquer the world. Mussolini called his political movement fascism. Hitler named his Nazism for National Socialism. In Russia, the forces of evil took charge in the name of communism. So yeah, the hybrid was not. The hybrid was socialism and nationalism that Benito Mussolini invented. But of course, socialism is built on the back of communism. It's just a nicer word. Really the same thing. These were all totalitarian forms of government. They were the opposite of democracy. They were the opposite of democracy. In a totalitarian state, individual people don't matter. Only the state is important. Why did good people listen to these terrible leaders? Why did some modern nations become gangster nations? Those are questions that are hard to answer. It didn't happen here. It didn't happen in England. We were just lucky. Were we just lucky, or did our democratic traditions give us the strength to resist the evil thinkers? The Depression brought grave problems to the people of the United States. In 1933, hogs were selling for about 2.5 cents a pound in the Midwest. One farmer had to sell all his hogs to pay his rent for a month. Another farmer sold a wagon load of oats to buy a pair of shoes. Hunger and malnutrition were serious problems in the 30s. Many Americans were angry and desperate. It is not surprising that some of them too listened to their two horrid voices. They needed to blame someone for the problems, so they paid attention to the Ku Klux Klan, the German-American Bund, which was inspired by the Nazis, a radio preacher named Father Coughlin who spewed out a message of hate to others. A few Americans no longer believed that all men were created equal. A few wanted to throw out the Bill of Rights, and most Americans rejected the philosophies of wickedness. Why did we escape the 20th century virus of totalitarianism? Was it the New Deal leadership? Was it our tradition of liberty and democracy? What do you think? Could it happen here? Sidebar. After the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the old Russian Empire became a collection of republics called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, or the Soviet Union. The republics were not all Russian. They included Central Asian Muslim peoples such as the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and the Azerbaijanis. Caucasian peoples such as the Georgians and Armenians, and the Baltic peoples such as the Latvians and Estonians. These countries were supposed to be independent, but they were not. They were controlled by Russia, the Soviet Union's largest and most powerful republic. Many in America referred to the USSR as Russia or Soviet Russia. The Bund combined Hitler worship, its salutes, rallies, and brown shirts, with perverted patriotism. Washington was the first fascist, is what they said. Charles Lindbergh urged Americans not to fight Hitler. He let his anti-war feelings make him do